The fossil record is one of the most compelling lines of evidence for the biblical worldview. The next 7 minutes will show you why. We've all seen before and after pictures from the construction of a house. Laid out sequentially, the photos tell the story of how a vacant lot became a family's home. You start with an empty field. Then you see a foundation poured. Then a wooden frame constructed atop the foundation. Then plywood added to form walls and the roof. Then external and internal details, like bricks and windows on the outside and carpet and countertops on the inside. With a few more details here and there, the final pictures show a house ready to be lived in, comfy, cozy and complete. But what if the pictures showed the foundation being poured, then the roof going onto the structure, then the completed house, and then the framing going up? We would say that the pictures must have gotten out of order, right? The story told by such a sequence just wouldn't make sense. But what if the builder came along and said, "No, that's how we did it. We prefer to build houses out of order"? Would you believe him? The evolutionary explanation of history runs into this exact conundrum in what is considered one of its strongest pieces of evidence. You see, if life on Earth had formed according to the evolutionary timeline, you would expect to see certain signs. Just as the house has visible markers of its construction progress, evolution should, too, and the fossil record is where those claims would be borne out. What should we expect to see if evolution's claims were true? We should expect to see 3 features in the fossil record. First, we would see a progression from simpler life to more complex life. If the layers of dirt were laid down slowly and methodically over eras that span tens of millions of years, the closer you get to the surface, the more intricate life you would expect to find. This structure is known as the geologic column, and it contains layers that purportedly line up with time periods like the Jurassic era, the Cambrian era, and the Cretaceous era, among others. Additionally, we would expect to see fossil evidence of transitional creatures. If all of the creatures we see today evolved from more primitive creatures of eras gone by, then we should see a gradual progression, culminating in what we see today. In a house, you would expect to see a picture of a blank space, then a frame made of 2x4 boards, then a completed room finished with drywall. In creatures, we would expect to see something like a primitive fish with fins in one layer of dirt, then a creature with both fins and legs in the next, and finally, creatures with legs that have outgrown their fins in the upper layers. Finally, we would expect to see incredible consistency in the layers. If the layer of the Jurassic era took 56 million years to be laid down, it would have very little overlap with the era before and after it, and no overlap whatsoever with anything that was more than one era removed. Creatures do not get laid down and fossilized over a period of 120 million years. If the theory is correct, the overlap should be extremely minimal. So, these 3 features are what we should expect to see in the fossil record if evolution's claims are true. If, over hundreds of millions of years, life gradually developed while layers of sediment were slowly laid down, it's only logical that these 3 things would have happened. Is that what we see? No, on all 3 counts. To draw on the house analogy once again, when you begin to flip through the pictures, you start to realize how out of order this evolutionary house was built. As to the first claim, that the geologic column shows a steady increase in complexity as life forms evolved into what they are today, what we see is quite the opposite. All over the world, we see the layers tossed and turned, and inconsistently applied. Additionally, every animal phyla we have today can be identified in the very earliest supposed layer, the Cambrian era. We don't see a gradual development and diversification across phylum. We see complexity and diversity from the beginning. Secondly, the proof of transitional fossils is one that to this day remains sorely lacking. Plenty of supposed missing links have been trotted out as proof in the fossil record that molecules to man evolution, or what is called macroevolution, happened in our past. But each case has been proven to be a misinterpretation at best and a brazen fabrication at worst. If we have undergone hundreds of millions of years of evolution, though, shouldn't there be millions, maybe even billions, of transitional fossils? Shouldn't the fossil record be overloaded with so-called transitional forms? Cavemen, our alleged primitive ancestors. Given hundreds of millions of years and presumably billions of creatures dying in the process, we should expect to be positively overloaded with such fossils. Third, and finally, the consistency of the layers is thoroughly debunked by a phenomenon called polystrate fossils. What is a polystrate fossil? Polystrate is a compound word that essentially means multi-layered or multi-leveled. So, a polystrate fossil is an individual fossil which spans multiple layers of geologic strata. All over the world, we have documented fossil evidence of trees and other specimens which have been fossilized vertically in the layers of strata, transversing what evolutionary geologists would claim are representative of hundreds of millions of years of Earth's history. These polystrate fossils can only be explained in one of two ways. Either the fossil was somehow gradually preserved and fossilized over the course of multiple eras, spanning hundreds of millions of years, or the geologic column's analysis of the layers, ages and processes is flawed. Seeing as the first option is a physical impossibility, we can only conclude that the geologic column's explanation of the fossil record is flawed. Keep in mind, evolutionists view the fossil record as one of their strongest evidences. As this evidence relies on assumptions that are easily debunked, we have good reason to look elsewhere for an explanation. In contrast, the biblical worldview is perfectly consistent with what we see in the fossil record. We see animals of varying levels of complexity buried next to each other because they were created by God at the same time and shared the planet together. That we do not see a progression from simple to complex does not just debunk evolution. It strongly suggests a simultaneous creation. We see human fossils, ape fossils, and fossils fairly closely related to all of today's creatures because we have all been the same from the beginning. We should not be surprised at the utter lack of evidence of missing links and transitional fossils. There aren't any because such creatures never existed. This is further evidence for creation's interpretation of the fossil record. Finally, we see polystrate fossils because these layers did not need hundreds of millions of years to be compiled. Life on Earth was not the slow developing process of death, trial and error as the evolutionist claims, resulting in these layers of sediment that represent tens of millions of years apiece. No, the polystrate fossils tell us this was all laid down very rapidly and is not a useful measuring stick for Earth's history. The biblical worldview provides us a linear, logical set of snapshots spanning from the beginning of life on Earth to what we see today. Evolution shows us a world built completely out of order. If you want to learn more about the lines of evidence that prove the biblical worldview, please visit linesofevidence.com.